Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to Dublin City University. My name is Federico Fabbrini. I am a professor of EU law and the director of the Brexit Institute, and it is my great pleasure to open this conference entitled An Economy That Works for the People Beyond Brexit and Covid-19. As you all know, exactly a year ago, the European Union experienced two dramatic developments. On 1st February 2020, the United Kingdom withdrew from the European Union. And since March 2020, the EU, like the rest of the world, has been mired in a global pandemic. Since then, Brexit has advanced, with the UK leaving also the EU Internal Market and Customs Union on 1st January 2021. And of course, COVID has continued to profoundly affect our economies and our societies. Nevertheless, the EU has taken unprecedented steps to respond to this challenge, notably last summer, when it launched a new recovery fund named Next Generation EU, designed to rebuild the EU economy along the strategic priorities of a Green Deal, digitalization, and inclusive society. The purpose of this high-level conference is to offer an in-depth analysis of the transformational impact that Next Generation EU has had on European economic governance and European integration in light of Brexit and COVID-19. The event is organized by the Brexit Institute at DCU in the framework of a Jean Monnet project called RELAY, which is funded by the EU Erasmus Plus program and led by the University of Maastricht. And I sincerely want to thank my colleague, Professor Christine Neuhold, for involving us in this initiative. At the same time, I am delighted we have been able to put together an impressive list of speakers, which range from academia to business and the world of the EU institutions. In fact, we are thrilled to be able to feature in today's events representatives from the European Commission, the European Court of Auditors, the Eurogroup Working Group, and the European Parliament. Moreover, I would like to take this opportunity to thank warmly the sponsors of the Brexit Institute, AIB, Grant Thornton, and GSK Stockman, whose support enables the Institute to carry out its critical mission. In particular, many of you will know that AIB has just renewed its sponsorship of the Brexit Institute for 3 more years. We are extremely grateful and proud of the trust the bank has placed in us, and we look forward to continuing this fruitful cooperation, which now will continue and stretch into the mid-2020s. Ladies and gentlemen, before the pandemic, the European Commission set as one of its priorities an economy that works for the people, and that has remained a goal for the EU institutions and member states. We are therefore humbled and honored that Commissioner Paolo Gentiloni, the European Commissioner in charge of the economy, has accepted to kick off our conference with an opening statement. Due to a last-minute institutional commitment, we were informed just recently that his involvement had to be asynchronous rather than synchronous, but we are delighted that he's still with us virtually today. Without further ado, I will therefore turn on the video feed from Brussels so we can hear from Commissioner Gentiloni, after which I will hand the floor straight to my dear colleague, Professor Greg Hughes, the Vice President for Research at Dublin City University, who will chair and moderate the opening dialogue and introduce its distinguished speaker, Alex Brenninkmeijer from the European Court of Auditors, and Thomas Wieser from the Eurogroup Working Group. Just as a final housekeeping note, let me remind everyone that we are recording this event and that later in the conference, there will be the opportunity for participants to ask questions by either writing them in chat to the panel chairs or by asking for the floor, in which case we will proceed to unmute you. Once again, I would like to warmly welcome you to Dublin City University Brexit Institute and to thank you for being with us. It's great that the conference has received several hundreds registration and it is my great pleasure now to introduce Paolo Gentiloni, former Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Italy, and currently the European Commissioner in charge of economic and financial affairs.
pleasure to be with you today, albeit virtually. Last year, Europe witnessed two events for history books: the worst pandemic in over a century and the departure of one of its member states. Brexit may be behind us, but the pandemic is by all means not over. However, thanks to the rollout of vaccines, we are starting to see the famous light at the end of the tunnel. So while we keep battling the virus, we must also look ahead at the challenges facing the European economy and how we can support the recovery. Today's conference is therefore very timely. And let me thank the Dublin City University Brexit Institute and Federico Fabbrini for the initiative. 2020 also brought a third, more positive event of historic significance, and that is the agreement on Next Generation EU. The Recovery and Resilience Facility that lies at the heart of Next Generation EU will allow the Commission to raise up to 673 billion on the financial markets to support its member states. For the first time on such a scale, the EU will issue common debt for a common goal. And this is something that was previously unthinkable. I believe it can be seen as a turning point on the long road towards a stronger union. And the aim is not simply to bring back the economy of yesterday. We will use this opportunity to build the economy of tomorrow, one that works not just for the people, but also for the future. And how will we go about it? First, we have very ambitious climate goals. To achieve them, we will need action across the board, from renewables and grid infrastructure to energy-efficient buildings and sustainable transport. The biggest chunk of RRF funds, 37%, as you know, should go to investments in the green transition. Second, we must make our economies ready for the digital age. Our target is for 20% of RRF funds to finance these projects, from 5G technology, AI and automation to public and private sector digitalization. Third, we need to ensure the recovery is a fair one, where no one is left behind. The green and digital transitions need to be just, or they just will not happen. Next Generation EU is much more than a fiscal stimulus to jumpstart short-term output. It's a plan to lift Europe's long-term growth potential and make our economies and societies fit for the future. We are now entering a crucial phase as member states put the finishing touches on their national recovery and resilience plans. This is the first time that member states are asked to prepare such strategic plans in such a tight time frame. It's a challenging process, but we are getting there. The Commission will then assess the plans to make sure they are aligned with our common European priorities and have the right mix of investments and reforms. This is our chance to tackle our structural weaknesses and make our economies more competitive, more resilient, and more sustainable. Next Generation EU will be a test case for the Union as a whole. If we make a success of it, we'll have laid the groundwork and provided a blueprint for how to tackle downturns in the future. I'm looking forward to the ideas that will emerge from today's discussion and wish you all a productive conference. Thank you.
Thank you. So good morning everybody, and distinguished guests, you are very welcome to this event hosted by DCU. I'm very pleased to chair this opening session on the EU Recovery Fund, and I'm honoured to introduce two very distinguished speakers to make opening addresses, which will be an opportunity after for some Q&A. First, I want to introduce Alex Brenninkmeijer, who studied law and economics at the University of Groningen. He has worked as an academic and has served as a judge for over 20 years. He was professor at universities in Amsterdam and Leiden and is currently the honorary professor of law for the Institute of Constitutional and Administrative Law and Legal Theory at Utrecht University. In 2005, he was appointed National Ombudsman of the Netherlands, a position that he was reappointed in 2011. And since 2014, he has served as a member of the European Court of Auditors. And also I'm delighted to introduce Thomas Wieser, who is a former president of the European Working Group and of the European Finance Committee of the European Union. Before becoming president, he was Director General for Economic Policy and Financial Markets in the Austrian Ministry of Finance. He has a strong academic background with a degree in economics from the University of Innsbruck, and he pursued postgraduate studies in theoretical and mathematical economics and taught at the University of Colorado Boulder on a Fulbright scholarship, as well as the Institute of Advanced Studies in Vienna. So I'll call now on Alex to make his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Greg Hughes, for this kind introduction. And I would like to thank you all for this invitation. I believe it's an important discussion today on the future of Europe and especially on the Recovery and Resilience Fund and Next Generation EU. The title of my introduction is History Will Tell Us. And if we listen to Federico and also to the Commissioner, you can hear that on certain moments they refer to history as an important element of what we are observing. Why do I mention history? One of the major problems is that with incidents like Brexit and also COVID, we are often attracted to the details of what's happening, and we can discuss the details very profoundly. However, the main line is the line of history, and the history is more and more important than the details. And we should try to get rid of the issues of the day and to see the bigger picture. If we look at the bigger picture, I start with the development of the European Union as such. The philosopher and historian Luc van Middelaar has observed that the European Union started as a legal union and a bureaucracy which was well functioning. But over the years, the European Union has become an institution which is challenged to deal with incidents, migration, an economic crisis, a financial crisis, a capital market crisis, and a migration crisis, a COVID crisis, and so on and so on. And what we can observe in the development of the European Union is that there is an emerging cooperation in Europe, which is really challenging. If we start with the European semester as a response to the 2008 crisis, and the Court of Auditors did audit the response of the European Union, especially the action of the European Commission related to the European semester, we can see that on the one hand, the European semester was a huge step forward. And what was the heart of the matter with the European semester? It was not only a program of surveillance of the national fiscal policy in the member states. No, it was a feedback system which focused on the fiscal policies in the member states. And to a certain extent, the Commission started a very fruitful dialogue with the member states to give an external input to the debate on the national fiscal policy. And it was in the interest of member states, but also in the interest of the development of the European cooperation that it happened in this way. We can also observe that this kind of emerging action of the European Union is provocative in the sense that it is challenging the national autonomy, and some speak of the issue of national sovereignty, and on the other hand, feedback from the outside on the choices which are made on the national level, and are they effective, yes or no. In my view, if I take a little bit distance from what's happening, I would say that the interaction between the European Union and member states in the European semester is a best friend advice. But it is very difficult for the member states to adopt it in their national policies. So there is a tension, and this tension is very fruitful and should not endanger the progress of the European cooperation. This small history is extremely relevant to understand, in my view, what's happening with the Recovery and Resilience Fund. The Recovery and Resilience Fund is to a large extent also an expression of emerging policies as a response to inter alia COVID and the economic financial consequences of COVID. And we can see that the Recovery and Resilience Fund and the structure behind is in many perspectives very innovative. It is innovative in the sense that it is performance focused, in the sense that it's not about spending money, it's about getting results of the budget. And that's a very good choice, but it is a very difficult one. How to transform a spending European Union with budgets for certain goals into the direction of performance and payment of funds on basis of performance instead of money seeks projects, as inter alia with the regional development is connected, and the social funds. Another innovative element of the Recovery and Resilience Fund is how it is financed. It is not a contribution by the member states. No, it is financed by the capital market. And in fact, it is an expression of this very strong position of the European cooperation on the capital market. The European Union is able to get the money in. I've said it, the European Recovery and Resilience Fund is innovative. And what we can observe is, and I believe it's historically important, that the Supreme Court in Germany is opposing it, and that many people in Germany say, oh, no, this is going much too far. And we will see some legal problems with the Supreme Court in Germany. And at the end of the day, the Court of Justice in Luxembourg has also its role to play in interpreting the European Treaty and the European cooperation in the light of this new structure. The most important question, and that's a question for the future, is how will the European Commission, in cooperation with Council and Parliament, implement the Recovery and Resilience Fund? And that's not an easy question. It isn't finding a way in the future of cooperation, and also finding a way of a good dialogue with the member states. And again, here we can observe that the element of the best friend advice is extremely important. Lastly, I mentioned one issue which is heart of the matter of the European cooperation, and that is the conditionality, especially the conditionality in relation with the rule of law. The European cooperation presupposes that we are all support the rule of law, that we have a legal system which is obeying the most fundamental principles of equality and access to justice. If we read the text on this conditionality, it's not only based on, let's say, compliance issue. It's not a compliance issue. It is related with sound financial management, and in the perspective of the Court of Auditors, sound financial management is a very broad perspective which is focusing on performance related with questions of effectiveness, efficiency, and economy. So it might be highly interesting for the future of the whole program. How will the European Commission, in cooperation with the Council and in cooperation with the European Parliament, but especially in cooperation with the Member States, make effective this performance aspect of the fund? I hope that my introduction is provocative enough for questions, and I hope there will be a fruitful discussion on this highly interesting subject. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alex, for those opening comments. Over to you, Thomas.
Thanks very much. Catherine has unmuted me. Very good. Thanks very much for the invitation. Thanks, especially Federico. I'll try and leave out what I prepared, where I would simply echo what Alex was saying. I think we are very much on the same line on many issues. And maybe I won't go back in history that long, but simply take a look at where we were 10 years ago when the great financial crisis and then the euro area crisis struck, which of course was a very different kind of shock. Many people believed, and some still believe, that was a purely fiscal shock. But in reality, the fiscal problems, the fiscal asymmetries were a superficial phenomenon of more deeply underlying issues, which related to many things which in modern terminology one would probably subsume under the word of governance. But the big, if we complain today, the media complain today how unprepared we were for the pandemic, let me take you back 10 years. That's when we really were unprepared. We had lived, and I think this is especially the case for Ireland, in a kind of what was termed at the time Goldilocks economy. Everything was perfect and hunky-dory, and all of a sudden problems happened, started in the financial sector and morphed all over the economies. And especially in Europe, we didn't have a clue what to do. We did not know how to deal with economic imbalances, especially within a monetary union. And our lack of understanding had gone so far in deciding on the Maastricht Treaty that we had done away with the one economic instruments we would have had the balance of payment adjustment mechanism within a monetary union, because there can be no balance of payment crisis within a monetary union. Be my friend, as one greeted the Greek finance minister in 2009 when he came in and told us about the problem. So it was a complete lack of understanding how the crisis had emerged, what to do against the crisis. There was a lack of political will to solve it, a lack of general political will to solve it, and a complete lack of institutions to solve it. And it took us a couple of years, not only to get around sort of the politics, it took us a couple of years to produce the institutions, what is now the European Stability Mechanism. We fortunately managed to take first very important and large steps on the so-called banking union, with probably the most important thing to come out of the crisis in terms of institutions was centralizing banking supervision under the umbrella of the ECB. So this time around, we were better prepared. We had a European Central Bank which very rapidly adapted its monetary policy instruments. We had the possibility to provide assistance through the ESM. And of course, importantly, we were much better prepared to use fiscal policy as an instrument against the economic consequences, much better prepared than we had been a decade earlier. And at the forefront of the discussions in 2010 and at the forefront of the discussions back in 2020 was the issue which we have always called solidarity versus solidity. And this was, of course, the very big issue back in 2010, when north of the Alps, there was a strong presumption that if you wanted solidarity, you had to do very strong fiscal reactions. So first, the solidity, whereas south of the Alps, the impression was, well, solidarity is what we need now. And solidity comes then as a consequence. This was less pronounced this time around, but it also shows, and I think there I try to catch up with Alex, it also shows how the issue of sovereignty is very important in this discussion. And sovereignty is not a binary issue. It's not either you have full sovereignty or you have no sovereignty, speaking maybe now to our English friends. It's always somewhere in a continuum. And if you so want, there are probably 2 or 3 very sovereign countries globally at this stage. First and foremost, probably North Korea, and then arguably maybe the US and China, but within limits. But a fortiori within a European Union, and even more a fortissimo within a monetary union, you give up a high degree of constitutional and factual sovereignty when you enter. And that is, of course, the big discussion that we had in 2020. If you start receiving money by redistribution, distribution, finance on capital markets, distributed with the mechanisms that the Commission is putting into place, is there any degree of conditionality involved? And that was what was so politically divisive back in 2010, 11, and 12, the conditionality that was associated with the loans of the IMF and the European Stability Mechanism. There was a strong feeling that it took away the sovereignty of the Greek people, the Portuguese and the Irish and the Spanish and the Cypriots, took away the sovereignty over decision-making. But on the other hand, other people argued, well, if we are going to provide so much money, if we are going to take this risk, we want to make sure that the right things happen with this money. And if you had been willing to take these policy choices yourself, you wouldn't be in the kind of problem that you find yourselves in. So conditionality, you force it on other countries to do these things. And this shows the genius of people back in 1944 to found an institution like the International Monetary Fund, which has one agenda, sits in Washington and can take the heat because they just are damn unpopular. Ask people in Southeast Asia in the 90s, ask our Greek friends, et alii. Shows the problem that our friends in the European Commission have, because they are not a one agenda institution, they are a hundreds of agenda institution, and therefore can never afford to have an antagonistic relationship with one of the member states over issues of conditionality. And I've always been very glad not to have been in the shoes of Jean-Claude Juncker and his people during the Greek and other crises, because they had to juggle all of these different kinds of agenda and how to be very cooperative on the one, but antagonistic on the other. So conditionality, sovereignty, huge issue, and an even huger issue in 2020, when many people argued, rightly so, the pandemic is not our fault. But on the other hand, we understand that if you want to transfer share money and risk, you want to make sure that it's being used correctly. So maybe this as a background, why I very much agree with how the whole NGU RRF was set up. And that brings one to the issue, how can we make sure that this setup is working? That Alex called it the good advice from the Commission. But is good advice necessary? Yes. Is it sufficient? I would argue not. And everybody who has had children knows that only good advice gets you only that far in making them fit for grown-up life. There has to be a balance of, let's say, other mechanisms as well, in all friendship, of course. So how do we ensure that member states develop programs and projects that make them fitter for the future? Not only through the evaluation by the Commission, not only through the feedback by member states, not only via some kind of yellow cards that can be waived at the Economic and Financial Committee. It is then elevated, if necessary, up to the European Council. What do we want? We don't want a good highway, or don't want only a good green project or a good digital project. What was at the heart of all of the problems we had a decade ago, what is at the heart of many of the problems that we're facing nowadays, the inequality in efficiency, productivity, etc., is our problems of governance, our problems of transparency, of problems how, if you so want, countries are governed and administration is set up. And if we can insert, without this overt conditionality, mechanisms that make administrations more accountable, that make administrations more efficient, that make administrations at times less corrupt, which makes politics more, let's say, driven by facts and not other issues, then we will also ensure that the programs get better, that the projects get better, and that the economic outcome is very much better. So we have to raise the costs, the political costs of being off track with these programs and projects. And that is an issue still to be settled. I strongly believe that if responsible politicians had to appear before committees of the European Parliament or before the plenary of the European Parliament and explain what the problem is, how they have to rectify it, that would give a high degree of publicity to these issues, would feed back into national media, and that's the only thing that incentivizes national politicians to do better. We can never be totally sure that this will be the case, but it is a strong incentive to do better. Otherwise, they always hope that a veil of ignorance will prevail outside of their country. So with that, I think I'd better come to a closure. We need to ensure transparency. We need to realize that the projects can only succeed in the long run if the underlying governance, if the underlying system of administration and politics changes in a positive manner as well. And if all of this is done, Next Generation EU, even though it is macroeconomically not a really huge game changer, it's 3% of GDP, that's not much, but it can be a huge game changer in changing the growth trajectory of the European economy, reducing growth differentials between different member states of the European Union, and as such, a win-win situation. But there are many ifs, and the ifs are around the politics. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Thomas and Alex, for those opening remarks. I can't see any questions or comments at the moment. But if I just start off, Thomas, and if you think that there was a very different response to the financial crisis that you chart out in relation to the pandemic response, and I wonder sometimes, could that be due to the fact that during the financial crisis we weren't all equal offenders? And that whereas in the pandemic, everybody has been impacted. And I wonder, has that fed into those decisions around what the approach that is being taken? You know, obviously austerity was the weapon which was used and had tremendous consequences in many economies. I just wonder what your thoughts on that are in terms of that difference in approach.
Yes.
Well, okay.
Yeah, Alex first.
Alex first? Okay, sorry.
Okay, yeah. Well, thank you, Sevi, very much for your observation, Craig, because I believe it's highly relevant. But again, I would say history learns. And it was a lesson of history in the sense that the step towards austerity and, in fact, a system of punishment appeared to be not effective. In the sense that from a certain economic perspective, one could say austerity is a perfect answer to the financial crisis. But on the other hand, the effects on economy and the effects for citizens in Greece, in Portugal, in Ireland were devastating. And the lesson learned was we should do it in a different way. So the response to the COVID crisis is not austerity, but spending. But spending in a conditional context. And I just signaled before I pass the floor to Thomas in the sense that the issue of sovereignty and the responsibility of national member states is also very interesting.
Thomas, any thoughts?
Well, you know, COVID is more clearly perceived as being something of an exogenous shock. Calling it Deus ex machina would not be the right thing, but it's something out of ex machina, probably. Whereas there was a strong feeling at the time that it was the individual member states' fault. And let me add, as we are speaking to Dublin, that the most profound and soul-searching and intensive and good reflection of how a country got into such a crisis was done in Ireland. That was really quite something. Secondly, we did have a wee bit of this discussion at the beginning of the economic fallout of the pandemic, because quite obviously, Germany was in a much better position to react massively, fiscally, than Italy was. So there was a bit of a beginning in some maybe more Calvinist-oriented constituencies to say, well, look at us. If you had done better in terms of fiscal policy, you wouldn't be where you are. But fortunately, I think for all of us, this discussion died down. And thirdly, the picture of unemployed people speaks less to public opinion than the pictures of dying people. If you remember the convoys of military trucks bearing coffins through the streets of Italy. So all that together, plus a certain learning capacity of our political and administrative systems helped in producing a response. And let me say, there's been criticism that the European response has been so much weaker than the US response. If you add up Next Generation EU plus all of the national fiscal responses, plus realizing that in all our member states we have that much better social and health policy instruments at hand and policies that work, and therefore need to hand out less cash to the citizens because we've got a good unemployment insurance system and the like, I think then we compare actually quite favorably to the United States.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for those comments. I see Ramon has raised his hand for a question, but I've just been told by Federico that we've actually been joined by the President of Ireland, Michael T Higgins. You're very welcome to this very, very important discussion. So, Ramon.
Thank you. This was a very interesting discussion, and I fully agree with the things that have been said here. I just wanted to insist on your transparency and conditionality aspects. With the ESM, we had been looking carefully at all the conditionality because we had all these programs, and therefore we can just look exactly which, we had thousands of conditions when you put them together, which ones had an effect or not whatsoever. And the lessons are fairly clear, actually. First of all, there are some things that they actually work. For example, in the case of Greece, that they had to change the way that the pension system was at that time, and they increased substantially the retirement age. So there are liabilities that countries have that are easy to account. And it's easy to agree that this thing needs to be done and can be done. Then there are thousands of conditions, which I will call them extremely paternalistic, okay, telling everyone what to do in extreme details. So what happened with these conditions? Well, typically they are not really properly assessed later on or just forgotten. So they played no role whatsoever, no effect whatsoever. The only ones that had some effect were the ones that you could quantitatively assess and had aspects of financial aspects. And that's it, which means that the lessons from then, we can apply them now. And now it's true that one can say, and that had helped, that COVID is an exogenous shock. The problem is exogenous shocks have endogenous consequences, which are very different. And in part have been precisely because some of the Southern European countries, we had to stop a lot of expenditures in health and so on, and now you find it in a worse situation. So yes, this aspect is still there, but I think there are good ways also to design contracts. Maybe should that not be so unconditional, look more on the performance and to improve on that. So I think we are improving and learning a lot. And thanks. And transparency, and this idea of having prime ministers going to the parliament to say how they go, I think is excellent.
Thank you, Ramon. I don't know if Alex or Thomas want to respond to that. Alex, you're on mute.
I'm very obedient to the system. And I applaud the intervention of Ramon in the sense that he also illustrates the importance that history learns, in the sense that analyzing interventions in the past, you can analyze what is effective and what is not effective. And if it comes to the paternalistic aspect of these kind of programs, I believe it's extremely important to learn the lesson that this is not working in a sense. And for that reason, I also mentioned the issue of the best friend advice, in the sense that we should not underestimate the mutual efforts which has to be made on the level of the member states and in member states on regional level, for instance. But the efforts on member states level may be represented by the Prime Minister in Parliament, that he can tell what they are doing. So the effort should be communicated, should be transparent, and in interaction with the European Commission and at the end of the day, the Council. So this interplay is extremely important and is developing. So mistakes can be made, and a paternalistic approach might be very ineffective. But on the other hand, it might be a start for a good cooperation. I believe that, and that's also a perspective from member states, that one of the issues which is highly relevant is that some discussions are unwelcome in the capitals of member states. And what Brussels can do is bringing in the questions which are uncomfortable. So it might be difficult. It might be a difficult conversation between the Commission and the member state. It should not be paternalistic, but it might be difficult. And this difficult conversation might help member states to improve. I fully agree with the analysis of Thomas, that if you look back at what happens to Greece in response to the financial crisis, was that helpful in any respect, or was it a top-down program, pushing and punishing, and maybe also paternalistic to a certain extent? And to what extent was it an invitation to improve the fiscal policy in the country and the functioning of the public service, for instance? And the same goes for Ireland, in the sense the lessons learned for Ireland were also extremely important. And one can say that the lessons Ireland learned from the financial crisis were very helpful for the development of the economy of Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. And Thomas, I have a question for you from Marlon Hussman. And the question is that you mentioned the tightrope you walk between sovereignty and institutional power. So the question is, what in your opinion would be the benchmark for nations to trade off sovereignty?
Yeah, I was going to respond to that first up before addressing the issues of paternalism. And if a very unscientific, I'm just a simple economist. If a superficial reading of the attitudes towards sovereignty in Europe is that it's also a function of size. The larger the member state is, the more they still have the illusion that they're quasi-sovereign. And it's smaller countries, right down to Luxembourg, but also including my country, Austria, that many years ago learned that there's no way that they're sovereign in their decisions, and that there are a huge number of exogenous constraints. And well, a country like France, a country like Germany, on the global scale, they're small countries. So you could say we've got two kinds of member states. Small countries that have realized that they're small, and small countries that still think that they're big. And that colors their attitudes towards sovereignty on a global scale and within the European Union. And for me, the most striking example is one that pops up regular intervals, once a year or once every 2 years. That's the fact that the German Constitutional Court in Karlsruhe does not accept, like I think nearly every other constitutional court, that European law trumps national law. Trumps should be using that word. Overrules is the word since January of this year, fortunately. So there is a continuum, and therefore we have this huge divide between, let's say, constitutional or nominal sovereignty and factual sovereignty, and we're also interlinked with each other. Forget the word. We'd probably best create a new one. It's functional interdependence or something like that. And that brings one then to the issue of how, if we are so interdependent, and if we have given up so much sovereignty in the wardrobe, do we draw the right conclusions on our policy interdependence? And the answer is no, because there, if we are told to do something, we say, oh no, we're independent, we're sovereign, we're not going to let Brussels or anybody else tell us what to do. Even if then we turn around like the Austrian government and says, oh, we want more vaccines. Shouldn't be saying that. So it's different shades, but there's no white and no black. And let me just say on paternalism. I was very recently in a virtual roundtable on the Greek program, and it reminded me of the criticisms that the IMF had been facing in the 90s for its very granular conditionality and prescriptions for the Southeast Asian economies. And they reflected on their errors thereafter and said, oh, we were much too paternalistic, too granular. Next time will be different. Then came the Greek crisis. What happened? The memorandum of misunderstanding was hundreds of pages. And why? As people from the institutions delved into the problems, they saw that it was pervasive, and the lack of competition in pharmacies, bakeries, distribution of milk, taxis, ferry services, what have you not. I could go on until 12 o'clock, Dublin time. All of that was not because of regulations on taxis and regulations on bakeries and regulations on pharmacies. It was captured markets. And special interest groups have captured the pharmacies and the bakeries and So you had to somehow get a grip on these issues to make the bakeries and the pharmacies and the taxis more competitive, which would bring about benefits. So I think Ramon would say, leave that to the individual member state. Colleagues from the IMF and EC Commission and et cetera, would have responded to Ramon and say, well, if they had it in them, they would have done it long ago and we wouldn't be in this problem. So I don't know who's correct, but I'm just showing the two sides of the argument, that there are reasons for not being too invasive and too granular, but there are other reasons for being pretty invasive and granular. And my conclusion is, if you can manage to improve the governance of the system, the administration, the politics that determine the functioning of the administration, then these problems will go away over time with increased transparency and better policies. But if you don't, they're there to stay.
Okay, thank you. I mean, and those tensions, yes, those tensions will be there, I think, between those different, and I think maybe our nearest neighbour to Ireland has gone down a certain route in terms of sovereignty and maybe ignoring that bigger dimension. But listen, that's happened. We don't have a vaccine for that, so we don't have a vaccine for that. So listen, I'm conscious of time. I don't know if anybody wants to make any more final comment. Federico?
Yeah, if I can just take advantage of the 2-3 minutes left we have. I mean, Ramon has made a question from an economic perspective, the perspective of a professor of economics. One question from a perspective of a law professor, perhaps more to Alex. Alex, you mentioned the issue of the rule of law. That is very concerning. The state of the new regulation approved by the Parliament and the Council hasn't yet sort of evolved. The Commission has not adopted the guidelines. The European Parliament has threatened that it will bring a case against the Commission for failure to act in front of the European Court of Justice. From their perspective of your institution, which is not the ECJ, but still it's a European court, how relevant is the lack of enforcement mechanisms for rule of law in the use of fundings coming from Next Generation EU, but also the MFF?
Okay, thank you. Well, from the perspective of the European Court of Auditors, as I said before, I'm very open and provocative in my contribution to this conference in order to provoke a discussion. If it comes to the position of the Court of Auditors, it's a much more difficult position in the sense that the Court of Auditors is always looking backward in the sense that after a certain time we audit what has happened. But I believe that it's a challenge for the European Commission, it's a challenge for the Council, for the European Parliament, for the Court of Justice and the Court of Auditors to develop the framework for the rule of law and the conditions for the conditionality in a way that it is effective. We can observe that the European cooperation, and especially also the cooperation within the economic and monetary union, is fully dependent on a good functioning legal system which is obeying the rule of law fundamentally. And if people are, and if member states are playing with this system, it's a very serious threat. But I believe it's an issue of development of the criteria and how can you assess those criteria for a real good funded criticism on what is happening in the member states. I hope this is a very brief answer to a very complex question.
Okay, Alex, thank you very much. And just in the interest of time, I'd like to thank Alex and Thomas for their very thought-provoking opening remarks. I think it sets the scene very well for the discussions later today. I see other questions coming through, which unfortunately we don't have time for. But listen, thank you very much for those contributions and starting those discussions. So I'd like to hand over to Professor Christine Neuhold, who will actually chair the next session. So thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.